Okay, so yeah, it's an honor to be here. It's my third year actually in a row, and I'm very happy to give you this presentation. And I know the title sounds bold, and we probably have to discuss it afterwards as well. But I will unfortunately come in the very end of this presentation to it, and you have to listen all the way through to get the reason why. So, yeah, I'm Maximilian Möhring. I'm the CEO and one of two founders of Keyp, together with Jonathan Barrett. Keyp is an decentralized architectural customization platform. So we do ID orchestration. And to do so, we build a self-sovereign identity on top of that. And this is actually working because we are the largest ecosystem of identity providers in Europe. And this is kind of interesting because this is the way how we can see and understand this super complex and crowded market. Because we see all the different trends, all the different approaches of all the different identity providers, and where are they heading, and what technology they are using. And this kind of rare point of view is what I will share with you today. So before we jump in, we have to understand how the market works, to understand where are the problems and why things are changing, and then in the end, why blockchain can be only one answer. And to do so, we start with the barely minimum, with the ground of it. So all of this market is built on trust. So as you know, we have claims, we have to verify them, we have identity attributes, all of them, at least we have to trust in. And why is that so important? Because basically, if we look in our economic system, the ground, the core of our economy are the contract and the parties. And if we digitalize them, they become data. And then we have to find ways to make sure that we can still trust in those, so that we can still trust that the party is the party he says he is. And to do so, we will now look a bit more from a macro point of view how this whole market works. So we have companies that you know, that are just examples here. And basically those companies are a sum of user databases. So all of them are cooking their own soups. Some of them open their user databases to distribute it to others. But in the end, everybody's building their own system, is building their own architecture. And they build it over years and decades, so they're kind of stuck in it. And every time they have to change something, it takes quite a while. And now we have around those companies different providers that are basically verifying parts of those user databases. Obviously, we have different types. We have identification providers, we have authentication providers, we have identity access management systems, and so on, so on, so on. But in the end, all of them are helping those companies in the middle to verify their user databases. And that's basically the market. That's how it worked for the last decades. But now things are kind of getting changed, because now governments and the world is kind of understanding that when we handle personal data, that it's a personal issue. And especially government says like, well, what are you doing there talking about user data and storing them? That's actually our job from a history point of view. That's our monopoly. We are the real identifier of humanity. And so now we have different forces that are changing this market. And those forces can be on the one side, technology-driven ones, like web standards, like we see, for example, we have OpenID Connect, or SML, or Active Directory, or whatsoever, that are now kind of creating a change in the systems. And we can see this also not just from an overall point of view, but we can also see that in different industries. For example, in the automotive industry, we see a new standard arising with digital key, for example. So a lot of different standards are now popping up and forcing those systems of the companies to change, to adapt. But that's not all. Like I said, also the government now wants to play a role and is starting to create regulations. Regulations that also force this market and also force the change of those systems. And as most of you know, we have the GDPR, but also new standards and new regulations are coming like PSD2 or EIDs. But on the other side, we see, for example, with BBFC there in the back, completely new things happening like in the UK. In 2 months, so on the 15th of July, there is a new regulation in the UK that says every content that is over 18 has to have a real age verification, a real age-verified login in front of it. This means now 4 million websites have to implement this new age verification. And this means 40 million users now will be age verified in the UK, just with one regulation, just to give you an understanding how this pressure, how this force actually works. So if you sum it up, what I can say is, in general, you have to prepare yourself because the market is definitely changing. Change is for sure. The question is only how and through what? Through technology or through regulations. Like I said, and last but not least, as we're creating more and more of it, and we see more and more providers, and we see more and more standards, and we see more and more regulations, this means the complexity is increasing significantly as well. Because the more parties you have in one system, the higher the complexity it is. So let's now have a look into how we see, so from our point of view, the identity providers are behaving, what they are creating, and how they want to tackle this market. To do so, we have to look again at the principles. So how does it work on a micro point of view? And there you see 3 different parties. That's basically how the whole identity market works. So on the one side, in the left corner, we see the relying party, which can be a bank or an insurance provider, automotive, or whatsoever. And they now have a user database, and they have users, and they somehow have to make sure that the data of the users got into their system. But to do so, sometimes, as we saw before, they are regulated, or they are forced somehow, or they need some help, which is why they implement an identity provider. For example, we can say, if we are a bank, we need a video identification because we have a KYC AML compliant process. So to do so, I now have, as the bank, also to implement the identity provider. And the identity provider now needs an interface to the user to identify the user and then transform the information to it. That's actually how the whole market works. And if you now look at it from a provider point of view, there are different ways of tackling the market. There are different types of product that we figured out. The one is universal identities. So there are companies out there that say, okay, what I want to do is I want to make the user experiences easy as possible. I want to give them an option to store their identity centralized or decentralized. As you can see, you have a lot of different technology approaches here. For example, Civic is blockchain-based. Facebook, obviously not. Verimi is maybe in between, definitely not blockchain-based, but maybe decentralized somehow, but probably not. And all of them are actually saying the same value proposition. You can reuse your identity, you can reuse your attributes, you only have to create once. This is a kind of expensive approach because obviously you have to address a lot of users on the one hand, and on the other hand then talk to relying parties and make sure that they somehow can also use the users and the attributes. And that's actually another attack vector, so where you have classic identity access management solution that are basically saying to the relying parties, no matter what you need, we figure it out. We have a huge suite of all types of features, of all types of products. No matter what you need for your identity infrastructure or your architecture, we can build it for you. And now, the identity and then we have like a subcategory, which are kind of aggregation companies that say, okay, in the end, I bundle a couple of different solutions, put them all together, and sell them at once as a bundle to my customers to make the integration also easy. And now, one new trend that we see that comes especially from video identification providers are KYC platforms. So where the identity provider specialized and focused on to make the integration to the relying party as easy as possible, to implement as many standards as possible, to have a very easy and fast integration in general. So that's basically what we see, how the different providers are behaving at the moment. But within the last years, there was a new type of provider coming up. And therefore, we now have, again, to zoom in a bit. And those providers are actually tackling all of those different parties. And there are two types. We have the standardization providers as well as the infrastructure providers. So when we talk about standardization, I see this typo, then we have, for example, the W3C that is saying in the end, I want to standardize the identity world to make it as easy as possible of using it. How they do it is basically they have a lot of different working groups that are looking at a lot of different identities, topics or related topics, and the most common or the most known ones for now the DIDs, so decentralized identifiers, as well as the verified claims. And that's how they try to standardize the internet. On the other side, we have other providers, like FIDO, for example, that are also trying to create a standard for authentication to make it as easy as possible to use and domain across. But also we can say that yes, although we don't know how the code actually looks like, but yes, probably will be a standard as well, as they're trying to build it for the bank IDs, also on a decentralized level. On the other side now, we have infrastructure providers that can use and adapt those standards. It's more a question of adoption, so is the standard something that's already been used? Then probably infrastructure providers jump on it. So that's a thing we can see now with WebAuthn. How this will behave, we don't know yet. And there we see, for example, Sovereign, which is definitely a blockchain-based approach that also uses the W3C DIDs as a standard, for example. So all of those parties are now having one value proposition, which is make the interaction between those different parties as easy as possible. And there you can actually see something, which is we see only one blockchain provider here. There are plenty more, but in the end, the value proposition and what they're targeting and what they're looking at is not a question of blockchain. That's the technological approach behind it. But there are actually several different approaches of tackling this topic. And the best part here is that all of them are decentral, but not all of them are blockchain. So what I'm trying to say here is when you are thinking ahead and when you're thinking of how should I create and design my architecture regarding identities, then I can give you three takeaways that you can take with you. The first one is build on decentralized identifiers and identities as well, because that's something for sure that we know. You will, through regulations and through other standards, need additional information. You need verified claims. You need some verified attributes. It's only a question when. Think about the UK market. There's one regulation. They announced it actually last month. So we have 3 months of implementation, this standard. And that's something that can appear to you. And that's the other part, like you have to become identity standard agnostic. It's very important that you build or that your system is that kind of open or designed that you are able to use different type of standards. Because as we saw it, there are a lot of standards coming and we don't know which will in the end be the most adopted ones. We can maybe assume it, but in the end we don't know. And that's the overall key takeaway I can give you, which is that you create a flexible system architecture. You need something which is able to be, that can be changed and that can be adopted quite easily, because this market, as I said before, is changing so much. We have this huge forces coming, so we don't know how it will look like, but we have to be flexible so that we can deal with any regulation up there, that we can deal with any standard. So when it comes to blockchain, I'm not saying that blockchain is not a great solution. Actually, I'm out of the blockchain world. My last startup was blockchain-based. I'm saying that's not the right way of asking the question. Blockchain is definitely a technology that is great, and it's definitely a technological approach where how you can solve identity problems. But decentralized is definitely the future of identity, because it's not about the technology approach behind it, it's about how you design and solve identity in general. And that's actually it. Thank you so much for listening. You can reach me out on Twitter or send me just a mail, and we can also discuss it afterwards. And yeah, thank you so much.
Maximilian, for that perspective. And I think one of the ongoing themes is be flexible regarding the identities you accept in your business. We had a variety of different angles on that, but I think this is really one of the common things. You will need to accept many, many different types of identities in the future, which has a variety of reasons. Factually, you brought up some extent a regulatory perspective. I brought up, and others brought up the user expectation, the convenience of serving him the way he wants to. Exactly. And I think this is really the thing, the open thing. So thank you again, Maximilian. Pleasure to have you here again.